From Hong Kong, this is Mea Culpa, the Lessons Learned from Startups podcast, based upon the Postmodern conference where founders, investors, lawyers and mentors share their stories about working on, with or for startups. Today, we do something differently. Normally I have one guest and we talk about their journey into entrepreneurship and what they learned from it. But today we have two guests, actually two founders that are doing something in the mental health industry. 2015 study from Michael Freeman showed that 49% of entrepreneurs struggled with mental health issues. Entrepreneurs are more prone to mental health conditions. From that study also shows that twice are more likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to have ADHD, 10 times more likely to suffer from bipolar, 2 times more suicidal thoughts, and 3 times more of substance abuse. Founders are often reported by the media as rocks and resilient. But in the meantime, they have to juggle family, friends, investors, peers, staff, and advisors. And then I'm not even talking about their actual business, their suppliers and their customers. So today we have two people here on this podcast, Justin Kong and Megan Lam. I will ask them to introduce themselves. So Meg, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Meg. I'm the CEO of Neurum. We do digital behavioral health as a service for companies, and we developed a platform, Clara, which is clinically validated and powered by machine learning. So this means that we're able to deliver personalized and effective support to millions of individuals real time. And I'm proud to say that we're revenue generating and have a really awesome and unique team behind us.
Thank you, Megan. And Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin. I founded Everyday Empathy, and basically I'm building what I'd say is just a private practice that focuses on coaching and counseling services for founders, creators, entrepreneurs, basically anyone that has the aspirations to create something, build something.
Okay, thank you very much. Then normally I ask the question, how did you end up in entrepreneurship? And I'm still going to ask that to the two of you. So Megan, how did you end up in entrepreneurship?
By accident.
Humor.
But this is true. I never intended to actually build a business. So my background is in neuroscience and mental health research. And I feel like in another life I would have gone to law school, but due to personal stories to do with mental health, that now means I have a background. I now have the background that I do. So with entrepreneurship, it really started out with me wondering if there was a way to better understand people and give them mini interventions on their terms, right where they are. So it could be in the car, at home, at work, really understanding mental health in the real world. So that's when I added digital health as a lens into my toolbox. Ended up advising a corporate founded network, realized there were, issues about scalability and sustainability to do with mental health and wellness. And from the problems and meeting my co-founder at a very fateful time, did I start building Neurum.
Okay. And Justin?
I came into this as almost I feel like it's finally walking the walk rather, because for most of my career, especially last 7 years, I've been supporting other founders and working with other founders at a startup, at VCs, inside managing accelerator programs, incubators. So I feel like I've done everything except actually jump in and found a business. And I think, to be honest, I didn't quite know what the business would be until I was like, well, why not focus it all around the skills that I want to develop, which is around coaching and counseling and supporting the mental wellness of these people that are very special, very competent, but often very lonely. So yeah, I mean that's the kind of aspirational way of looking at it. But honestly, I've just been very interested. I mean, I'm studying psychology undergrad, always trying to help friends and stuff. It's always been part of just who I am and what I do. So it felt natural to start this.
Okay. Let me start right a bit, already in my introduction a little bit. Are startup founders more susceptible for mental health issues?
Yes. I mean, the research is definitely in on this. Now, I'm not going to go too much into causality and causation and stuff, but the data is in that entrepreneurs are definitely higher risk whether that is a bit of self-selection because they put themselves into high pressure, high intensity situations, or starting a business in itself is a high pressure cause to take on. So there's that. There are some, I guess, congenital and biological aspects of it as well, but I don't think it's rather, if we're looking for the factors into this, I'm more focused on rather what we know now, so what do we do aspects of it. So short answer is yes.
Yeah, I agree with Justin. And, Jeffrey, at the beginning of this, for the intro of this podcast, you listed a couple of stats there. That being said, I want to tag on to Justin's point as well about the directionality of that effect. Have we, as founders, self-selected ourselves to, jump into the business building world? And, Jeffrey mentioned that, founders are more at risk. And, as much as that, we know that mental ill health and mental illness, there are multiple, it's a cocktail of different things that go into the mix. And the environment being one, Justin, you mentioned a biological component being one as well, our social element being one. But I also want to bring to light that oftentimes founders themselves might already have a mental illness. It's not that they've, picked the founder route, and then suddenly they were at risk. But I often feel like I want to move away from the idea of mental illness and risk, because the founders that I know that have experienced ill health or are cohabiting with an illness are the most resilient people I know.
Okay. To tag along on that, also from my personal experience, one of the stats that I mentioned was 10 times more prone to bipolar. Now, I've experienced that from my own with previous ventures that I did. If you're just highlighting that one item right now, I know it's way broader than that, but is bipolar already existing in somebody but not showing, and when the stress of a startup amasses, then it will become visible, or can it be developed while doing a startup?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's speculative. It could be both ways, and I think it differs on a case-to-case basis.
I mean, I can jump in on this a bit too, because a more progressive way of looking at mental illness. I mean, you can call it illness. I think technically bipolar is an SMI, so it's a severe mental illness. Is that it's a diagnosis, and to be honest, diagnoses are human-made constructs, right? It's something that we are assigning a value to, and so if you look at how bipolar manifests, it's a high energy or high mood state, or a low mood state, and just veering between these spectrums. And I think when people are in the high energy state, they could create amazing things, but in the low mood state, they might actually be more in the thinking phase. Now, the severity obviously varies per person, but I'd rather take a more progressive look on it, as in, okay, once you combine these symptoms, we call it bipolar. But in some ways, it can be harnessed as a strength for founders to execute rapidly in their high energy state, as long as they then don't go, as long as they're able to balance it out and they're more contemplative in their lower mood state. So,
is this a time where I can say that I have bipolar or no?
If you want to share that.
Is that
up to you.
I don't know if this is like the platform to do it.
Yeah.
It's really up to you. I mean, it's very personal to you. So
I don't mind it at all. I think it just differs from platform to platform. I've been on interviews where they wanted to know more about my story and my founding story, but the ironic thing
is that's the one thing that they didn't want
to talk about. That is the one thing they didn't want to talk about. They've edited the entire, so they would edit the entire founding story of how, I have bipolar disorder. I have a mental illness. I was diagnosed long before I started Neurum, and
so you learned to live with it.
I learned to cohabit. Yeah. It's like an annoying roommate that lives in my brain, but yeah. I feel the funny thing is that we tend to just shine a harsh spotlight on the parts where we're not doing well. But it's one of those things I want to demystify, is that you can actually cohabit with a mental illness and be successful and build a revenue generating business. Yeah. And
entirely up to you. I
think I just I mean,
we can just edit. I mean,
we can use this. I actually find this very interesting, the way, because why would we have to ask to share something like this?
Yeah.
Yeah? Like, why should we have to ask, is it okay that I'm saying that I'm bipolar?
Yeah.
It should not be. In my personal opinion, it should be as obvious as saying like, oh, I had my knee broken when I was 5 years old.
Right.
Not everybody knows it and it's not visible.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to share that, why not? If people, me personally, if people don't want to hear that, then it's more that person's problem than...
It's more them.
Yes. So thank you for sharing.
Anytime.
So how does that influence you as a founder, beside of building the business, but also at that point engaging with your staff and your co-founder? Like, were you open and honest about that with your co-founder when you're first starting talking about doing something together?
Yeah, I mean, we're building a behavioral health tech company. I feel like it would be very ironic if I wasn't open and honest. And it's one of those things where I don't think there's a need for disclosure sometimes. Like you mentioned, I have to disclose that I have bipolar, because I just don't see how that's going to affect our co-founder relationship. And I'm very fortunate that, Caleb's also a brilliant person who, before meeting me, has his own, mission and purpose in the mental health space himself, but, using his, software development skills. So really the yin to my yang at that point. So yeah, I didn't really feel a need for disclosure. It was just a very natural conversation, like a similar one we're having now. Yeah.
I mean, I never had any diagnosis, but I've definitely had my share of mental health challenges. I very openly will disclose that I do see a therapist on a regular basis, and that's been helpful too. And in fact, I'd argue that people should see therapists when they're feeling great, because at least you get used to it when get used to having this relationship with someone, like professional, when you're in the best of times. So at least when you're not feeling as great, you'll have something to kind of, it's like having a home base to kind of return to. So yeah. But again, like it's not for everyone. And ironically, this is a service I provide. This is a service I make money off of. I would argue that talk therapy and counseling is not the end all be all of care or self-care. So yeah, that's, and again, like, finding someone to support you is actually the key point. It doesn't have to be a co-founder. It's great that Meg has a co-founder that's that open and supportive, but maybe, in fact, the communication with your co-founder about what type of relationship you should have is that key. Like being open, like it's okay to not disclose everything with them if that's what you both agree to. There are other ways that you can support yourself.
Definitely. I agree. And that includes like leveraging, things you can do for yourself. Or it could be another founder who might not have, a previous diagnosis or living with, illness, but it could be them going through something similar that you're going through and just finding a social support in that. Or my partner, for example, he's a VC, and I know that he really walks the talk in taking care of me as he does, like with his portfolio companies and his founders as well. So I'm very fortunate in that way. But you're right, it doesn't, the way I talk with my co-founder isn't necessarily similar interactions I might have with different people in my life.
It's like, would you go up to a stranger and start disclosing your deepest, darkest, like
I am now?
No, but again, it takes, and as Jeff mentioned, like sometimes people, they are not ready to accept that or receive that. And so in a way, it is an intrusion of sorts, fine. And again, because I feel like in this room, we're very sensitive to others' moods or the others' energy levels, then that's why you ask that question, is this the right time to disclose, because you're respectful of that, and I think that's a strength. But at the same time, we should feel free to be ourselves too. So yeah.
When we talk about that, like being open and honest, when we talk about building a startup and building a team, and how do you provide a healthy team, and how do you, for instance, at that point, manage downtime when you're managing downtime for yourself, at that point also managing downtime for your team? How do you do that? Especially the question for Megan is, how do you manage that for your team itself? You are a mental health startup. you should act within the things that you preach. So
That's right.
how do you do that?
Quite frankly, I think you could, and it doesn't matter if it's you're a small company like Nurem, or if you're HSBC, or you're self-employed, it doesn't matter. I think it's doing it sustainably. So you mentioned downtime, and I want to sort of stress, if you can't do it 3 times a day, is it like really that sustainable? So the ethos I have with taking care of my mental health, and I shared this like with the team as well, as like taking care of my skin or brushing your teeth, right? It's really being proactive and preventative about it. And if I don't, I might potentially put myself in a zone where I might be at risk of a flare-up, an emotional pimple, if you will, I might gather a few wrinkles and scars here and there. So that could look like doing something practical, like taking mini breaks during the day, or the way you talk to yourself. So, for example, I have to remind myself and my team that you're not your craft. And because they're so damn good at what they do and they care about what they're doing. And people in general, we spend 1/3 of our lives at work. It is a very core, large part of our life. But just reminding people that isn't your self-worth.
Here.
Okay. Thank you for that. Justin, what are common myths and beliefs founders have that can hold them back while building something?
I think Meg touched on it quite succinctly with you are not your craft. I'd say to most entrepreneurs and founders, you are not your business, you are not your startup. You invest a lot of emotional energy into it, and I mean, I'm not here to disregard that. But again, let's say that the creation and the creator, if you don't take care of the creator, then the creation can't exist. Mm-hmm. Nor can you create again, because again, we know, I think we all know the statistics. 90% of startups, would have 70 or 90 depending on which study you look at, but a vast majority of startups fail. And so who keeps on starting them are the creators. So you got to take care of the creator, and it's tough and it's hard work. And this is what I preach with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs is it's hard work to take care of yourself, and it's a practice, like the self-care routines, talking to people, listening to people, that's all part of it. So that's hard work.
Okay. We've been talking about mental health a lot, but what is, just in your both opinion, what is the definition of mental health?
I see it as a spectrum and a balance, meaning it's a state that you're always in. Most of the time, I feel like it's a very long-winded way of going about it, but it's mental health can be built and strengthened by first building awareness around where your extremes might be, like what things might be impact you more or less, because that's the external environment, but also internally, what type of thoughts and what type of feelings impact you more. Some people respond to happiness, sadness, excitement, like these very primary emotions in different ways. And in fact, that's all part of that universe or spectrum of mental health, I'd say. So it's a very simple but tough question to answer, to be very, very honest. And it does, and it's personal. Sorry, at the end of the day, it's very personal to you, and there is no right or wrong answer. I think that's the better way, but it's very personal to each person. Yeah.
Megan, anything to add to that?
Please, add something. That can't be it.
I think there's a common misconception that it's when you're ill, you're always ill.
Yeah.
But you can, like I mentioned earlier, you can cohabit with an illness, but be very well, and you can not have an illness, never been diagnosed, but also be unwell. Right? So I think it's a very dynamic, very fluid thing.
Oh, it's changed. Yes, exactly. It's changing. Yeah. I think, like, if we want to use comparisons between physical health, our usual going to the GP, like about what's wrong with your what's happening with your body, not necessarily what's wrong, but what's happening with your body. I'd say that mental health, or at least related to the mind and even the brain, we're quite a ways behind in terms of sophistication and knowledge, or like just even common common language or common vocabulary around it, because I mean we've lost track about how many times we discuss what's the difference between mental wellness, mental health, mental fitness, well-being, like all mindfulness, like all these things, because we're still in this kind of experimenting phase where we're seeing what works and what's the best way to convey these ideas to people. So yeah, so it's fluid. I don't have a definition.
Thank you very much for that. Then, in your professional opinion, how much of the founders that have mental health challenges do you think are aware that they have them?
I'm going from the standpoint that it is very personal. And obviously I'm not going to disclose specifics about clients, but if you come about trends, I'd actually say that everyone is aware of their own mental health. They might not have the vocabulary to explain it. I think generally people know when they're stressed, but because whether it's a lack of education or awareness, they might attribute it to an external factor. A lot of times you get mad at someone else for saying something to you, and then maybe you might overreact. In your opinion, even you overreact to that. It could be just someone criticizing your work, for example, and you overreact. Like that's you making a check of like, okay, there's something off there. But if it's not at the tipping point, people might just disregard it for the day. But again, like it's about building awareness, because I'd like to see more clients when they're saying, I'm generally okay, but I've been feeling a bit under blah. Like that already to me is like, okay, you've built the when I hear something like that, that tells me that you've built the awareness, you know where your general baseline or standard might be, and you're feeling slightly off of it. So that's great. The tough ones are when someone comes to me and says, this has happened, I don't know how to deal with it, because that tells me that it's something that is hugely potentially traumatic or something significant that has thrown you way off of your balance, way off of what you consider your normal and okay, and you're at a loss of even how to grasp that. And so and again, like this very personal, like a lot of times even with friends, they might say, oh, this is not a big deal, but I'm struggling with and so they're almost making excuses for themselves, as in they don't expect this to be emotionally impactful for them. I just broke up with someone. I'm like, what do you mean you just? Like, I mean, depending on how long the relationship is, that can be as much as losing someone to death, right? In your emotional core. So again, like it's very personal, and I think that to more short and succinctly answer the question, it's people are aware, except a lot of times it takes talking to someone else to bring out what they mean and what they're thinking.
Yeah, just to tag on to what Justin said, I think people are generally aware of how they're feeling in the moment, their current state, for example. But Jeff, your original question was about, do people know if they're at risk, or at what point are they in the red? And I think, like Justin mentioned, like these things don't happen overnight. These don't just like suddenly happen and you snap your fingers and you sort of tip yourself over. And I think that can actually be quite difficult. The micro signals and the little things that you're sort of loading on yourself on a day-to-day, that like you mentioned, if someone criticizes your work, for example, maybe in another circumstance, like you would have, that might not have, had that reaction, but it could be a compilation of other things that are affecting your quality of life or your mental health, where that did have a significant impact. That particular thing had a significant impact to you. And I think it's really making sure that we have a mechanism where founders can have a way to check their own mental health pulse, if you will, to sort of know where we are, so we can regulate ourselves and incorporate that as part of our self-care process, or a way or a language we can use as a starting point. For Neuron, we use data for that. One example is, and I think a user put this so succinctly, he said, I never really thought about mental health anything really. And he was an engineer at a Chinese manufacturing company. I was like, fair enough. But he said, look, data is a good way for me to have a common language that really makes sense, that isn't too personal, for me to express myself in a way. That's a good starting point for people like him who are coping and curious.
Yeah.
When I was preparing for this podcast, doing some research, that kind of thing, I came about one of my notes from probably almost 10 years ago. And the only thing it said was mental health is connected to productivity. I don't know where the note came from 10 years ago. There was my poor note taking at that point, of course, has no source and no other side markings there. But what is true of that?
I feel like it was future Jeffrey traveled back in time to tell Jeffrey that this podcast was happening.
Obviously.
I think Meg can jump in on this one.
Meg, how is mental health connected to productivity? If yes, how?
She's got the data, so I'm going to leave this to her.
Well, I think mental health does have an association with your day-to-day functioning. And part of that day-to-day functioning is doing things like going to work and being productive there. So when we look at data, and there tends to be more around, larger enterprises, but the majority of people do something called presenteeism, where they come to work, they've clocked in, but they're not checked in. So I would say yes, it is linked to productivity, but I just want to be careful in that at what point is it really a detrimental effect on your day-to-day functioning. And it's sometimes okay to we're not always 110% switched on when we come to work. Like, let's be realistic about this.
Sometimes some procrastination is okay.
Sometimes a little bit of procrastination, or in neuroscience we call it the default mode network, which is when your brain is not doing anything. Like, that's also very good. We need that as well. That's very a normal thing in our life. So I want to be careful about this narrative of we have to take care of mental health because we have to increase productivity by X percentage or X amount.
I'm gonna mention something maybe a bit controversial for people who are starting businesses and managing teams, but I think the slogan of if you do what you're passionate about, you will never work a day in your life because you'll be doing it all the time. I'm just imagining the scenarios where you might have heard it for yourself, but you might hear it in a different context and different voice from someone that is a manager or a boss or something that's telling you to do something that you may not be 100% behind doing. And so it could become, and in that way, the measure of productivity is not something that you actually value at that point. And so the term productivity does it mean being in your seat? Does it mean what does it mean, and what is your measure of productivity is actually the more important question in this particular case, because maybe being more productive is working only 3 hours with 100% output.
Yeah.
Or 100% of what your previous output was. So I think that is the nuance around productivity, especially as we move from a very heavily industrialized, manufacturing heavy type of economy into more automation and so-called creative or knowledge work. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. What differs? We already touched upon that a little bit, of course, but what differs between the founder mental wellness and non-founder mental wellness?
I'll share a bit about, Jeff, you did mention some of the stats around this, and so I'm not going to go into rather the, you can call amount of challenges or concerns. I think what is different for the, and again, I'm speaking only as a secondhand, somewhat firsthand, but more secondhand observer of this, is that the difference tends to be the extremes to which founders put themselves through. Meaning they are generally, I've found, more intelligent on the IQ and even EQ, to be very honest, like IQ and EQ. So I almost feel like these measures are not necessarily the right measures of competency in this case, but rather they feel empowered and able to do things or build things that don't exist currently. That's what a founder or creator is doing. Now, with that comes the risks of you're investing emotional energy into something that's hypothetical. It's imaginary. And so it's in a way it can, you're investing a lot of energy into a imaginary object which may not return that or reciprocate that energy. And so that amount of uncertainty can have very different effects on the mental well-being or the psyche or how we interpret that. Not to mention, because they tend to be high-performing, high EQ, high IQ, they expect a lot more of themselves. And so that's a lot of internal pressure and external pressure too. So yeah, I'm not going to speak too much. I think that from a first-hand experience, maybe Meg can share a bit more.
Yeah, let's book in a time after this podcast.
Okay. Meg, you've been building a mental health startup, a business in mental health. What are common myths or beliefs that people have when you're talking about mental health startup, doing something in the mental health? Are you correcting people or demystifying some things on a regular basis? What is your challenge there when you say, I'm doing a startup in mental health?
Yeah, I think there are different components to that question. I guess I'll look at the one about, I think there's a lot of emphasis on stigma. This might be a little bit controversial. I don't actually think mental health in nature is actually stigmatized, but I do think the more we keep saying that it is, and we'll keep reinforcing that narrative. So I've noticed, for example, sometimes in conversations, we'll be talking about it, there seems to be quite a bit of progress, and then someone goes, oh, yeah, but stigma though, tough, c'est la vie, that sucks. And the conversation kind of like dwindles from there, and then I'm the least favored person in that party. So I think, yes, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a thing, but we really have to move on from that narrative. So ironically, I'd actually say that one of the things I want to move away from when building a behavioral health company is paying stigma too much mind, giving it too much airtime. So I'll actually give you an example. In the very early iterations of Clara, a platform, we actually thought, right, okay, stigma is a thing. We know that, check. So let's not be scary. Let's try to be, positive, water things down a little bit, try to make things more digestible for people. We were coming at it from a very well-intentioned place. But honestly, and this is why it's so important to listen to users and make sure that they're included as part of the design process as well, is that particularly over here, people just want things to be called what they are. They don't want you to sugarcoat things. They're very curious to learn more. People are increasingly, there's growing awareness. And people want to know the science. They want to know the science and the research behind things. And they're also, we noticed that just having information and support delivered through their connected devices was already a step in normalizing things. There wasn't a need to put a blaring light on stigma and designing the product so much around the stigma thing itself, if that makes sense. So I don't think the pitfalls are actually due to stigmatization directly. I think like any other industry, the pitfalls come from not really viewing or understanding the problem as is. So do your homework as a founder and investor.
Do your homework as an investor. Let me tag on to that a little bit, because I personally think also investors have a huge role in founder wellness. Previously, Deloitte research also showed that if the preventative support goes up, the return on investment also goes up. Mm-hmm. How, for the investors who are listening to this podcast, what could they do, even if it just doesn't even have to be VC, right? It could also be an angel investor or somebody from the FFF phase, the friends, family, and fools phase. Like, how could they at that point help the founder or the team that they are having a upside in to perform well?
Yeah, I think Justin mentioned a really good point earlier, in that an investment into your founders directly, in this case, in your founders' mental health, is probably a very, very good idea, because you are directly relying on them as well to, even from a business bottom line perspective as well, right? That's probably a really good shout. I think be it like I mentioned earlier, be it, like my partner, or if, an angel investor or a VC, one thing you can really do, and I do stress this as well, because sometimes we put a lot of onus on founders to do the taking care of themselves, is that we can also have more of hopefully going forward, more of a community-based approach, being supportive, knowing where to signpost people to get, the right resources, for example. Getting Justin in and speaking to your founders, for example, would be a really good idea. And the Deloitte report, I think previously in one of their previous versions, it was every dollar put in was a 4x return. But their most recent Deloitte Insights report actually shows that personalized and tech-enabled solutions actually provide an 11x.
I saw the same figures indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I jump in on a bit?
Yeah, sure.
No, because I think that in my own research to really starting this, even as a small business, I call myself a small business. I've spoken to VCs, I've spoken to investors, and I've actually been pleasantly surprised that, at least from an investment point of view, there are investors out there who are aware of this, and they actually kind of set aside a certain percentage. Now, that percentage does tend to fall into the overall well-being aspect of things. So things like gym and exercise and stuff, that might be part of it. But they are looking for resources to support the mental well-being as well. So it's something that it's in there. It's in the terms for some investors. So yeah.
Okay. I have some angel investments, and I've been actively reaching out to most of them in the last couple of months and weeks. But quite often, I personally don't know much to do beside of just having a call with them, asking how well they're doing, if they're taking care of themselves. What else could I do to make that more significant for them? Can you give maybe some tips and tricks where somebody in a position like me could, beside of having Justin talking to them.
I'm really appreciating the plugs, by the way, everyone. Thank you.
It's an investment to the founder mental.
So what could I do for all those angel investors out there?
And I understand that this is a bit difficult because of the role of the investor and how the founder perceives the investor plays a part into this as well. I've heard from some earlier stage investors, especially because they're very hands-on with their investments. They're playing that, they're almost playing as a family, like a family or loved one support, as in the ones who are more open to this are playing the open ear and whatever, the ear or the shoulder that they can rely on, whether that is and the techniques are actually very simple, to be honest. I think most people are able to understand and utilize them once they're aware of it, like active listening. So that's simply listening, reflecting, and sometimes you don't have to say anything or provide advice. It's just knowing that someone's there listening and not judging. And I think one of the things we haven't touched on yet is the idea of judgment, which kind of ties into stigma. It kind of ties into the founders, you can call it the worries that they have is sometimes locked into how others perceive or judge them. And so offering them a opportunity or a space where they're not feeling judged can be that breath of fresh air for them. So that's important as well. So as investors, it's very difficult, I could imagine, and full sympathy, empathy, sympathy, whatever you want to call it, to the fact that you might sometimes be hearing things that worry you as an investor. But if you're a person or a friend or a loved one, if you want to call it that first, then you might be able to kind of set aside that financial aspect just for that moment. So.
Yeah, I also want to mention as well that there is a level of shared value here as well. I always say, like, you hire or you invest in the best minds, so take care of them, right?
Yeah, for me, for now, what I said, like having calls with them, or when I see them posting something on Slack that is way beyond their normal bedtime, especially like one of the founders is in Austin, Texas, in the US, and at one point why is he messaging on Slack right now? This is probably 3 a.m., 4 a.m. for you. So at that point, I just said, go to bed. Of course, that's something. But
good kid, like a parent, go to bed.
go to bed. It's very hard, right, to do that. But seeing it as a family, seeing it as shared values, quite often, maybe I should ask them indeed more about indeed also. And that's also what one of my next questions be: what actionable steps for founders can there be to maintain their mental wellness, right? Maybe at that point, exercise. I've read also something about the 3 Fs, the faith, family, and fitness. What can you tell with practical suggestions there to help the founders be well? What?
It's actually 4 Fs.
4 Fs.
It's actually 4 Fs.
Okay.
But the last one may not be kosher for the podcast.
What's the last one?
Okay, I think the audience can maybe at that point already think what the fourth F could be, but that can be very relaxing indeed afterwards. But go ahead, talk about the first 3 Fs then.
Oh my gosh. Fitness. I mean, as I said earlier, if the only thing you're doing to take care of yourself is talking to someone or doing therapy, I would not recommend that actually. Having a balanced regime, I guess, or regimen of physical health and something. It does, like, I think recently is like been speaking to, and COVID. I understand COVID has been a massive bummer for anyone's plans around fitness, like things change. But even going out for a quick walk around the building, around the park, wherever you might be, 15 minutes, 30 minutes a day does wonders for physical and mental health. Walking is one of, I mean, granted, as long as one is able to walk. All right, let's be fully aware here, but yeah, that's being outside and being able to be active a little bit is very useful. Family's connection to people, to be honest, like or I mean, in family, I think is actually a broader term around people that you feel supported around and that you care and love. So yeah, that's another aspect. And so, because for me, it's actually the 3 Ps. So I'm trying to think, what's the last one? What was that? Sorry, what was the last F?
Faith.
Faith. Yeah. So faith is actually more related to purpose in my mind. So that's around having meaning, something that you assign meaning to in your life. Because I agree with some people that might be more secular or not religious, having something that you derive meaning from. And that's personal to you too. Like, it doesn't have to be about someone else's purpose. It's more that something meaningful to you.
Yeah, faith could also be, for instance, meditation, right?
Yes. Well, spirituality, like, it's like, yeah, something related to that, like something greater, in a way, greater to yourself, something greater than yourself. Yeah, that's a way of putting it. Yeah.
Meg, anything to add to that?
Actually, have a message for Jeffrey and just saying that I think it's brilliant that you're doing things to just small things like, messaging your founders, for example, and not do. I always say like sustainable message. I'll get into answering the question in jiffy, but promise. Like this is more like a big kudos for you for doing it, because I think there's a lot of situations where there's a large campaign or awareness or movement around things like Mental Health Month or certain landmark events, but not enough of pinging your founders and being like, get off Slack and don't respond and get some sleep. And it's that kind of sustainable messaging.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. So even tiny things like that count, right? I think for me, it's recognizing that what I need at different moments could be quite different. I'm not a big fan of one size fits all solutions, right? Some people, that might work for some people. Some people swear by meditation in the morning, for example, and that just doesn't really work for me and my lifestyle. So, which is why at Neuron personalization and doing that real time with reach is so important, because everyone's unique. So I'll give an example. Like, I think guided meditations are great. They're just not always my cup of tea. And sometimes I might have an intrusive, silly thought, and I want to put that on trial and challenge it and go through that exercise. Instead of letting it pass by like a leaf or it just doesn't work for me sometimes. And I think recognizing and over time experimenting on different things as well and seeing what really helps you out. Like
in you, probably.
Yeah, just go through. Just go through a range of different tools and exercises that, and really figuring and piecing out like what works, really floats your boat.
Yeah. And that's key. Being open to experimenting with different things, and for example, even if let's say, okay, for example, I say that I'm seeing a therapist, I've actually made decisions to change therapists because sometimes this stops being effective with one person. In the same way that the meditation exercise you might be doing for X number of years might not be appropriate or might not be enough anymore at a certain point, and that's okay to change and evolve from that. Like it's being open to, and as I'm sure as Meg develops her platform, there'll be more and more amazing digital therapeutic solutions out there that you can try. So it's about being open to innovation on this. I mean, not that I'm pushing things around like psychedelics and stuff, but I definitely know that the influx of investment into things like Compass in the States, psychedelics and things kind of bode well with the kind of medicalized or medication drugs aspect up on top of kind of more self-care, like more verbal or even meditation type of therapies. There's been a lot of research into this of late too, as in they aid, especially with people who might be previously more resistant to these meditation therapies. But I'm not, especially in Hong Kong, I'm not pushing a pro-drug message. But yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mac, for the shout out and the kudos. Me personally, what I'm doing myself, of course, we had here in Hong Kong, right, the COVID here hit pretty early. That was end of January. That actually at that point for me personally opened up when it comes to physical health. So as of April, I've been doing twice a week, 1 hour gym sessions, exercise sessions. That actually triggered me to start doing it. So the COVID actually started triggering me that. Even though at one point gyms were closed, take it outside. Walk out with my backpack and a yoga mat and some very light weights and some elastics and that kind of thing, and just do it outside. I think I've missed only 4 times since April.
That's very impressive.
That's great.
Yeah.
And that really helps me to cope with it, with the whole COVID situation. And I actually think that personally, like I've talked to other people about that too. It's actually for me now easier to do because I'm not traveling. I'm not somewhere for a weekend or a week in Seoul, or I'm not in Taipei, or I'm not in Europe, or it actually gives more regularity to my schedule. So every week, twice a week on the morning from 7 till 8, I'm there. I'm working out. And by the way, it also works very well with your weight balance at that point. I'm already for a very long time under 80 kilos.
Wow.
So it's, for me, actually, the COVID situation and the travel ban helped with that. So when you're talking about balancing your mental wellness, exercise is one thing, faith is one thing, your family. How could your family support you the best in that sense? Like at one point, I did a talk probably 4 or 5 years ago about the cost of doing a startup. And then it was not talking about the monetary cost. I was talking about opportunity cost. I was talking about relationship cost, mental health cost, all those kind of secondary costs. When you're talking about family and relationships, and then also at that point, of course, romantic relationships, is there things that they can do? And also at that point, are there similarities for your founder journey and your, at that point, also romantic relationships? Mac, maybe you can help in that.
You have a partner too, right?
So. I have a partner as well.
Yes.
I have family and partners too, but you can kick it off. You can kick it off.
Yeah, there's such an important part of your journey. And I think the important thing is they don't have to know exactly the ins and outs of what you do. My partner happens to be a VC, so he's like sitting on the other side of the table. So he gets a glimpse of what the rest of his portfolio companies probably experiencing as well, like on a day-to-day basis. But I'm really grateful to have him because I need that person to sometimes peel me away from my laptop at like 1 a.m. in the morning. It says, no, it's quite literally that boundary, if you will. And for COVID, personally, it's really blurred. I used to be able to go into the office before we had, Dim Sum Square downstairs with a positive COVID case.
It's closed down. Dim Sum Square is gone.
Oh, has it? Oh no.
Yeah.
No, I'm very grateful that I have my partner. He's very, very supportive. He's also a VC, so he sits on the other side of the table. So he kind of understands the journey in which I'm going through, and is very empathetic towards that. And he helps me in, be it like instrumentally. There are different types of support, different flavors. So it could be like emotional support. It could be instrumental support. So these are like more practical things, for example. Like for me, I hate spreadsheets. And he happens to have a finance background, so he's great at it. Just like situations like that, where I'm very grateful for. But there are like my brothers, for example, or my mom who know nothing about what I'm doing. It's a complete black box to them. But they're just being so supportive, just knowing that they're there, or even just asking questions and being curious about what I'm doing. And just doing the things that you're doing, Jeffrey, just like sending me WeChat voice notes to ask me if I've eaten, which is a very Chinese mom.
Which is also the name of Meg's podcast.
Thanks for the plug.
Neuron Health's podcast is called Have You Eaten? Cross promotion.
Inspired by my mom. Inspired by all Chinese moms out there. Shout out to the Chinese moms.
We'll put the link in the show notes.
Yes. So I think they've all provided some shape or form their way of showing support, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. Family is a tough one, I think, especially. I've recently done a few messages. Like, I guess this is what you call sustainable messaging, just to let people know that. This research has always been in like end of the year, Christmas, these times. It's rough for a lot of people emotionally. So, not for a lot of people not being able to see their family, which they're used to doing every year, is difficult. And I think, not again to put too much onus on reaching out, but everyone should try, and even on a sometimes feels like, oh, a message is not sufficient. No. It is sufficient. Every little bit counts. And a lot of times people are focused on what could be and what it isn't versus what can be and what they can do in the moment. And I think that's a very important reminder throughout COVID, is just every little bit can count, and making that effort to do a bit of connection there. And on that note, I've been very, very appreciative, which may not have been as much previously, that, family, the random message, mom will send me a photo of something she made, and I'd be like, that's a really nice looking soup or something like that. Like, but again, like, it's just having this kind of touch point, this small touch point where you're like basically, what I read in something like that is like, you are in my thoughts. I'm wondering how you are, and this is something that I'm doing in case you want to know, which I did want to know. So that was great. And so it's about sending these little things and recognizing the intention behind it. And so, yeah, like, family is important. Practically, my partner is very interested and very supportive of what I do. And what's actually great is that while she's interested, she understands that she can't always provide exactly the type of support, whether it's from a business point of view or from like a client acquisition or whatever, like a sales point of view. But she makes her point to ask me if I'm taking care of myself. She makes her point because it's just knowing that someone's caring about you is important that way. So yeah, having someone around, you're receiving, but in the same way, do remember to give a little too, and you'd be surprised what comes back. Actually, is what I'd always say. By giving or sharing a little bit with someone else, you'd be surprised with what comes back.
Okay. Justin, it's something that I regularly also ask on the podcast is, what is something that's not a secret, but most people don't know about you?
Oof.
It gives Meg a little bit of time to prepare for this one question.
Okay, I'm gonna take a few seconds. What's a secret? It's not a full secret. Most people do not know about me. Well, I feel like we've disclosed a lot on this podcast already, though. Like, most people didn't know I see a therapist. Most people didn't know
It could be a preference for a drink or
That's true.
food,
That's
or
true.
it could be that you're, I don't know, go for a walk on Sunday morning 3 a.m. or
I think really only the closer friends know that I really, really like to sing. No, I'm not. No. I really like to sing, and it was, I think, for a lot of people, when just because I don't actually usually get photographed in a karaoke room, for example, it was recently before COVID that I did some open mics just for fun, and I thought, oh, this is a decent photo of me, and I put it up on WhatsApp. That people were like, "You're in a band?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not in a band. I just like to sing. Like, let's not make it a big deal, shall we?" So that there's that. Maybe I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
I like to sing a lot, actually, and not just in the shower.
And Meg, what's something that's not a secret but most people don't know about you?
I can't sing. Housing prices seem to magically go down when I do. I'm kidding.
They should invest in soundproofing.
It's not a secret. I don't think it's a secret until you walk down the street and there is one of these things that pop up, but I am deathly afraid of cats.
Wow.
Okay.
Not big cats or kittens, just like the normal sized cats.
Okay.
I would take a detour. If I saw one,
You would
and then
cross a road?
I would cross it. I would take the next street.
Wow.
Okay.
I feel like there's a lot of blackmail material in
I know,
this
right?
podcast.
Like, see, this is stigma around cats now too. It's like, Meg is a cat hater.
No, let that be on record. I didn't say I hate cats. I am just fearful of them.
Gosh. Fake news.
Fake
Great,
news.
great,
Fake
great.
news.
Please edit that. Please edit that.
If there's one thing you want people to take away from this talk, what is it?
Oh, this is one that I've started using a lot. Is aside from the you're not your business or your startup, you are your own self. You're more than that. Is actually your journey is unique to you, as in your experiences are personal to you. But you are not alone in your journey. That's what I've been telling a lot of clients of late, is that it can be very lonely, but there are a lot of other people that are, in a way, if it's so, it's like they're lonely as well. And so there's an opportunity to connect as well. So yeah, that's one takeaway.
Okay. And Megan?
If there's one thing, I think it's to reiterate that I think when we talk about mental health and the entire continuum, people sometimes view it as a very negative thing. I think the gut reaction is to, like, when we first started when we just started recording this podcast, was to be a little bit sensitive and tiptoe around a couple of things in the wordings, but it's not all bad.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, yeah, that's true. It's like, I mean, when we started out, what was I saying? Like, if it's more socially acceptable, I think that we should inject more humor and lightheartedness into making this. It's like this somber, dark topic for a lot of people, and it's like, no, it's real life. It's just normal life, and let's make this normal. And when things are normal, you can laugh about it. You can humanize it, basically.
Right.
But again, like it's and I'm very wary. Again, this comes back to the whole somberness of it, how things are interpreted and what it means for other people, which is why we always end up with the default mode of, oh, this is a very serious topic. Let's be very sensitive. Like, we don't know how it's going to impact other people. The fact is, like, once you establish a safe space where people can be open, it can be a very positive and delightful topic to actually discuss. So.
Yeah, I agree. And this just reminds me, I was giving a talk at a design conference. And at the end, one of the audience's questions was, well, Mike, how do I get stress and anxiety to my company to zero? In which my response was, well, you'd have no company. I feel like you do need certain levels of these things to perform.
Yeah.
It's just very unfortunate that we've just focused on a particular shade of what mental health and wellness is. I
mean, what is it? Worry and anxiety tells you that, I mean, it's a signal. Remember, it's a signal. It's a signal to you that you actually care about this. And this is something that's important to you. So recognize it for what it is, because it's a signal. However, like, let's maybe work on how strongly that signal affects you. That's and what in what ways does it make you feel? So that's the kind of work that a lot of people need to work on, like whether it's through mindfulness or talking to someone. So there's a lot of ways.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to thank you for your valuable insights and your sharing. For the listeners, this would be our last podcast for this year. It has been 24 podcasts for this year. So that means on average 2 a month.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We will take a little break. Probably we'll be back after Chinese New Year. This will be somewhere in February, if all goes well, with a new series of podcasts about lessons learned in startups. There will also be in the show notes some links when you are seeking for help or you want to reach out or you want to talk about mental health. We will share some links there. For the listeners, although the rating system for podcasts is hideous, if you like this Mea Culpa series, you can rate this podcast with 5 stars and the motivation for the makers. We want to thank Mizuho Crowdbrain in Hong Kong for being the venue sponsors for this episode, and also thank Copy Ventures for making this series possible. If you have any suggestions for our new series, people that you want to hear on this podcast sharing their lessons learned in startups, let us know. Contact us also in the show notes. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Justin, for this podcast. This is Jeffrey Brewer. Go out and build something meaningful.